Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 1, Episode 3, Context is for Kings. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Star Trek Discovery up to Season 1, Episode 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, this to me was the typical second episode, even if technically it was the third episode, but really I count the first two episodes as one, as it was the two-part introductory to the show. And typically the second episode of the series is not a very good episode, as the first episode is always an explosive way to introduce the show and bang the audience into the show, whereas the second episode tends to be more of a low-key episode that more sets the stage into the setting that and getting us used to the characters and the new dynamic. And frankly, I thought this was an exposition episode, and that's basically all it was. There were a few attempts to try to have exciting or suspenseful moments, but honestly, I thought they failed, and I didn't really find them interesting at all. What I did like about this episode was some of the new characters we met and some of the interactions between the characters that we already know. So far, I'm finding the character story and the focus on the characters the strength of the show. When it gets into plot a bit too much, it tends to fall a bit flat. So we start the episode 6 months after the first two episodes. Now I heard the complaint that the first two episodes didn't need to exist, and this should have been the first episode, and the events of the pilot episode should have been shown in flashbacks during the events of this episode. So one thing I want to make absolutely, positively, perfectly clear is that I could not possibly disagree with this sentiment more. I thought it was such a great and original decision to start a show called Discovery on another ship, detailing the main events that are the most important to the main character and set the stage for the setting of the series. I personally think it was brilliant, and it makes the show more of a character show about Michael Burnham, and I think that's a brilliant and fresh direction for Star Trek to go in. Whereas, had they started with this episode and just had flashbacks, that would be so tired and trite, and would come off just like a billion other shows have done before. It would be so incredibly unoriginal, I would have hated it. So anyway, we see Michael Burnham being transferred on the shuttle to a prison colony. And if there's anything I learned from watching 24, it's that whenever you transfer a prisoner, that prisoner is never going to get where they're intended to go. So here we see Burnham with 3 other prisoners. 2 of them are actors I've seen on The Expanse before in supporting roles. One of them played the corporate spy from Season 1, and the other played the captain of the ship that went to Venus in Season 2. And if your response is to say, what is The Expanse? Or, I don't watch that show, then please, I implore you, watch The Expanse at your first available possibility. It is, in my opinion, the best TV show on right now, and one of the best science fiction shows ever. If you're watching Discovery, you can find the time to watch an even better sci-fi show. Anyway, that's just my shameless plug for the day. So anyway, Michael and the random woman and 2 guys from The Expanse get picked up by the Discovery, where they're greeted by the Discovery Chief Security Officer, Commander Landry, who's played by the actor who played President Roslin's assistant on the last few seasons of Battlestar Galactica. I actually like this character a lot, and the actor, as she was playing a very similar character, at least in terms of demeanor. She was a lot more physically intimidating in this show, though, but I thought this character came off as a pretty tough security chief without coming off as a cheap Worf imitation, as so many Starship security chiefs tend to do on sci-fi shows, so I was impressed with that. However, then we get my least favorite scene in the show so far. So in the first 2 episodes, a lot of people were complaining about certain scenes, saying it was un-Star Trek-like, like when Burnham gave Georgiou the Vulcan nerve pinch, or when Burnham killed the Klingon, or whatever it may be. Many were going as far to say that this show was not Star Trek because of these scenes. But honestly, none of those scenes bothered me, or came off as particularly non-Star Trek-like to me. But this scene, where they went to the mess hall and the other prisoners tried to kill Michael Burnham, really bothered me, and was the first and most poignant time the show has come off as not Star Trek, at least in my mind. First of all, it doesn't really make sense for the prisoners to try to kill her. It seems like a cheap way to add action into the show. But what bothered me the most is when the security officers went to interfere, but Commander Landry stopped them. This, to me, is extremely un-Star Trek-like. It's something that always bothered me in prison movies or shows about mental institutions where they're like 2 inmates or patients are fighting amongst each other, and the guards purposely turn their backs and not intercede. However, in the cases of those more contemporary films, it's realistic, as I'm sure stuff like that does happen all the time, but it really bothers me, and I think it's one of the cruelest and most corrupt practices. But maybe that's just me, maybe that's just my pet peeve, but to me that is like an extreme example of cruelness. But regardless, when I saw a Starfleet officer doing that and allowing a prison fight to break out in a Starfleet mess hall, that was simply and utterly unacceptable to me. Now, I know you could argue that Landry knew Burnham would win, or she just wanted to see what she could do, or she didn't care if Burnham died, but I still find that incredibly un-Star Trek-like, that any Starfleet officer would allow any prisoners to try to kill each other. Starfleet officers have been shown to treat all of their prisoners with the utmost humanity and respect, and would never allow any harm to come to any of them. It doesn't matter who they are. They could be transporting Hitler, and they'd still give their lives to ensure that no harm came to him. That's just the way Starfleet is. So this scene really pissed me off and was entirely not Star Trek, and was done for a cheap way to show that Burnham knows this Vulcan martial arts. Just a waste. Anyway, another thing that I kind of had an issue with was the way that everyone treated Burnham like she was, a Hitler figure, and, the claim that she started the war with the Klingons, and often they threw around the word mutineer, kind of like people say Kingslayer to Jaime in Game of Thrones, like it's an insult. But I'm still not sure how she started the war. What? Was it from killing the Klingon that was on the artifact? Because that was an act of clear self-defense and a misunderstanding. Burnham didn't know she was trespassing on their sacred ground, and when she tried to apologize, she was attacked, so she defended herself, and doing so, she accidentally killed the Klingon. What was she supposed to do? Let herself be killed? But since they kept calling her the mutineer as an insult, maybe they are suggesting that her attempted takeover of the Shenzhou is what started the war. But that makes no sense either, as she was actually never allowed to enact any orders before Captain Georgiou relieved her. And arguably, very arguably, had she been able to do what she wanted to do to fire on the Klingon ship, then she could have possibly diverted the entire war. So if you look at it in that way, the whole entire war is actually Georgiou's fault, not Burnham's. But the only thing I could think of that she did to start the war was by setting her phaser to kill instead of stun when she shot Takuvma, thus killing him and making him a martyr, the one thing that she specifically warned against. So this made no sense, as she should have stunned him and beamed him back aboard Discovery, which I thought was her whole plan to begin with. So if she did anything to start a war, it was that, but I have a feeling that that's not what these people are getting at, and in that case where she killed Takuvma instead of stunning him, I think that was just a case of bad writing. So I find the whole concept of everyone hating Burnham as the infamous figure unrealistic, not earned, and it feels to me like it was done for plot convenience in order to push the plot forward, regardless of the fact that really it makes no sense. Now, I know they do refer to her as the first person in Starfleet to mutiny, and that could earn her a lot of hate, but I do find that hard to believe that no one ever mutinied before this time. Now, there are no specific examples of this, as the only real Star Trek show to take place before Discovery was Enterprise, and I don't believe we saw any mutinies on that show, seeing how there was only one Starfleet ship in existence. Well, okay, a second one was introduced in Season 4, but still. But considering how many mutinies we've seen in other Star Trek series, I find it really hard to believe that Burnham was the first. This includes 10 years later, when Spock mutinies against Kirk and steals the Enterprise on a half-cocked mission to return Captain Pike to Talos 4, and many, many, many more examples, but that's just the earlier one. But there is the example of Garth of Izar, whose crew mutinied against him when he wanted to eradicate a planet for no good reason. Although I can't remember the time frame on that. I can't remember if that was before Discovery. But I'm not sure. Now, of course, in that instance, the mutineers were in the right, because the guy was trying to kill a whole planet for no reason, so some could argue that they were, they legally removed a mental unstable captain rather than mutiny, but that's semantics. Really. So then it all comes down to a matter of perspective, as some could argue that Burnham's decision was the right decision and could have averted a war had she not been stopped. And the fact that Georgiou refused to listen to her is what started the war. So then her being the first mutineer is all just biased opinion, but either way, I am really not buying this. So then we're introduced to several new characters, including Sylvia Tilly, who is the nervous, talky cadet just out of the academy that becomes Michael's roommate. Now, she's obviously introduced as some kind of comic relief, and I thought she worked just fine. I know some people were annoyed by her, and that's perfectly understandable, but I liked her fine. I didn't think she was the most interesting character in the world, but served the comic relief function fairly well. I liked how when she first met Michael, she said, "Oh, I'll call you Mickey." And Michael said, "No, you won't." I just liked that. It was like good comedy. And I thought that worked well. Although I didn't buy that they would assign a prisoner as a roommate and not even tell her about it. That doesn't make any kind of sense. But overall, this storyline with the prisoner being recruited by a Starfleet captain to do a job is very reminiscent of a plot from the Voyager pilot, where Captain Janeway recruited Tom Paris to help Voyager with their mission. And so Burnham's relationship or friendship with Tilly felt very much like Paris's friendship with Harry Kim, as Burnham, like Paris, was very standoffish at first and didn't want any friends. And Tilly is very much like Harry Kim, the fresh out of the academy, naive character, which Trek has actually done multiple times, so it's nothing new. But to be honest, I find Tilly a bit more interesting and well-rounded than Harry Kim, and I see more potential in her. And to be clear, I don't mind that the storyline is similar to the Tom Paris storyline, because it's different enough to be unique. In fact, I kind of like that the show is taking elements used in Trek previously and putting their own spin on it. So if anyone claims this storyline is un-Star Trek-like, they'd be wrong. Another character we meet is Lieutenant Stamets, and this character reminds me a lot of Mortimer Heron, a one-off character that was featured in the Voyager episode The Good Shepherd, who was a budding young scientist who didn't even want to serve on a starship, but was assigned to do a brief tour on Voyager when it got stuck in the Delta Quadrant. So he was more interested in writing scientific papers and doing scientific studies than he was in actually exploring space. And Stamets is very similar, as he's a scientist who'd rather work in a lab but was drafted into Starfleet because of the war, and thus was forced to work on his technology on a starship, and his partner was separated from him and they were split up and put on different starships, and he actually had the same sort of sarcastic demeanor as Mortimer Heron did. So these two characters are very much alike. And like Heron, Stamets has an adversarial relationship with his captain, and I like that. I think I like that. I think it adds an interesting dynamic. I particularly like his interactions with Burnham, who he referred to as a non-Vulcan number cruncher, and how he is adversarial with her. For example, the fact that Captain Lorca wants her to be there, and that her own motivations are irrelevant. That made for an interesting dynamic as well. But I like how when crunch time came, they didn't have any problems working together, as she followed his orders without question, and he was willing to give her a phaser even when Commander Landry wouldn't. We also get to see Saru again, who is now the first officer on Discovery, and I absolutely love this scene where Burnham was reunited with him, as they always had a somewhat antagonistic relationship, but a respectful one. So it was a great character moment seeing Burnham try to apologize to him and show her regret, where he accepted it but still feared her and thought that she was not really worthy as a Starfleet officer. It was a great scene that has me really excited about the future of the show, as the show's strength seems to be its characters and character moments. That's something that many Star Trek shows, especially Voyager and Enterprise, lacked, and something that's very important to any great show, and Saru in particular is shaping up to be a really interesting character. I have no doubt that he will be the Spock or Data of this show, the most beloved sort of alien-esque character that shakes things up and makes things interesting. So then they go on the mission to explore a destroyed ship that was the sister ship of the Discovery, on which Stamets' friend was on. And this scene was kind of dumb. I know this was supposed to be like suspenseful and tense, but I honestly didn't feel any of that. It was kind of boring. In fact, this scene did remind me a lot of the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, and it's never a good thing when somebody says that sentence. But I did really like how the Klingon just popped up and put his finger to his mouth and went shh, and Landry was like, did he just shush you? That was actually a really funny scene. I thought it worked really well, especially when the monster just came up and killed the Klingon. I did find it interesting how when they were on the shuttle ride over and Stamets and Burnham were arguing, that Landry was saying nothing and was just observing. It says a lot about her character. And then there's that security officer who goes along with them as well and gets killed immediately. I really wish they would have given him a red shirt. I know everyone's uniform in the show is blue for some reason, but I wish they would have found a way somehow to give that guy a red shirt. Whether it be like red armor or red badge or like a red, I don't know, something. Sure, that would have been shameless nostalgia plug, hint, hint, wink, wink to the fans. But frankly, this show has a lot of those already, like seeing the Tribble and Lorca's ready room, and the so obvious name drop of Amanda, Spock's mother. And frankly, I would have much preferred a red shirt call out to any of those other stupid call outs. I mean, they're following the red shirt trope by having this useless non-main character get killed, so they might as well go full tint and give him a frickin' red shirt. And also, there was the scene where Burnham was crawling through the Jeffries tubes where she was like quoting Alice in Wonderland, and I absolutely hated this scene. This was so fake. It felt so contrived. It didn't actually make any sense. When she started quoting this, I was like, what the hell is she doing? And it's just the way that she delivered these lines that didn't feel natural at all. It felt like she was literally being forced to read lines that she didn't really want to and didn't really fit. It didn't seem like she was in this scene. It seems like she belonged in a different scene. These lines did not fit. They didn't make any sense. In fact, one of the main points of disagreements I had with a lot of people is Sonequa Martin Green's acting, which a lot of people had problems with. But I was actually really impressed with her. I thought she played this character really well. That is until this scene, which to my mind was beyond an utter disaster. It's some of the worst acting I've ever seen. But anyway, let me finally get to the heart of the episode, Captain Lorca and the revelation of what Discovery is really doing. Now, when we first met Captain Lorca, it's explained because of an injury that he has to be in darkness and to have the lights come up slowly. That's a bit on the nose, don't you think? A character who literally is surrounded by darkness all the time? Come on. Come on. But other than that, I actually really like this character, and I think it makes for a fascinating premise to have a captain of a ship, the ship that the show is named after all, be a sketchy character that we're not too sure about. That adds a new dynamic to Star Trek that I think needed to have as it shakes things up. Now, I could just see all the hardcore Trekkies now complaining that this character is on Star Trek life, to have a shady captain whom is likely to be an antagonist and doesn't truly live up to Starfleet's principles. So to preempt that, I'd like to name a list of Starfleet captains and admirals that appeared in Star Trek who had less questionable morals and would often operate outside of the rules of Starfleet to accomplish what they felt was best for the Federation, who felt the ends justified the means. There was Captain Maxwell, who destroyed Cardassian ships and Cardassian stations, killing hundreds of Cardassians against orders because he thought it was the best way to prevent a war with the Cardassians. There was Admiral Cartwright, who actively participated in a conspiracy to kill the Klingon High Chancellor and frame Captain Kirk for the murder in order to sabotage the Federation-Klingon peace treaty. There was Admiral Layton, who staged fake acts of terrorism on Earth and blamed it on the Changelings in order to enact a coup that would overthrow the legitimately elected president of the Federation and put the Federation under Starfleet rule. And then there was Captain Ransom, who, like Janeway, commanded a ship stuck in the Delta Quadrant, but unlike Janeway, he disregarded the principles of the Federation by actively killing innocent aliens in order to get his crew home. And I could go on and on with more examples, but I'll end with the most poignant one, that of Admiral Eric Pressman, who oversaw an illegal scientific experiment in creating a Federation cloak that allowed ships to phase, which was expressly forbidden by the Federation peace treaty with the Romulans. In fact, he and a small group of admirals and other high-ranking officials formed a little conspiracy where they conducted these illegal experiments in the dark, where he even ordered Commander Riker to lie to his captain about it. So this, I think, is the most relevant example here, as it seems to me, much in the same way that Star Trek Voyager was modeled after the Next Generation episode Where No One Has Gone Before, it strikes me that Star Trek Discovery was modeled after the Pegasus, as that's an example of a dangerous new experiment being conducted under the radar, so to speak, by high-ranking officials who have questionable morals. And we follow a Starfleet officer who may or may not have to go against her own captain for the betterment of the Federation. I find this absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to see how this plays out going forward. And it's not like Lorca is a straight-out villain, as I loved his speech about context being for kings, as he was able to see through the bullshit, and he was able to tell that Burnham wasn't just some evil mutineer like those idiots were making her out to be, but that she's willing to do whatever is necessary to protect the Federation, which is exactly the kind of person that he needs. So this is absolutely a fascinating premise, and the fact that this is entirely different than the typical premise for Star Trek shows makes this just even more fascinating for me, and exactly what a new Star Trek show needed to be, in my opinion. However, in addition to the high-ranking officers I mentioned, there's another precedent of members of the Federation going by the ethos, the ends justify the means, and that is of Section 31, a group first established in Deep Space Nine and further shown in Enterprise and the film Star Trek Into Darkness. They are a top-secret underground intelligence group that a lot of Federation captains and admirals and high-ranking people in the 24th century don't even know exist. And the type of attitude that Lorca expresses of wanting to do whatever necessary to win the war with the clans is very reminiscent of Section 31's mindset. So this has led a number of people to speculate that Discovery is in fact a Section 31 ship. Earlier in the episode, we're introduced to these black badges officers are wearing, and it was never really explained. It was just pointing out, ooh, look at those black badges. And some have speculated that they are members of Section 31, but I actually highly doubt that. Has Section 31 managed to remain in the shadows and unknown to almost everyone as far forward as the 24th century? So for them to have a badge that identifies them is way too much of a public presence for them. In fact, if this does turn out to be the case, I'll be very unhappy because I think it's incredibly inconsistent with what's been established. What I think is more likely is that the black badges just signify those assigned to this specific spore project. As when there were issues with the project and these spores were everywhere, they had a black alert and a black badge, black alert. So I think it's just a color chosen for this particular project. But that being said, I do think it's possible that Lorca is working with Section 31, but if that's the case, it would be a lot more sort of low-key behind the scenes than all that, and perhaps this will be something revealed later on. But I could also see Lorca just being another questionable Starfleet captain, just like the other ones I mentioned before, but we'll just have to see. So my rating for Context is for Kings out of 10 is a 6 good. I was extremely close to giving this episode a 5 as I found it mostly boring. The action scenes did not work at all and felt really shoehorned in. Also, it felt really fake and contrived how everyone was treating Burnham at the start of the episode. However, this episode's saving grace was the character moments, as it introduced us to a lot of really interesting, well-constructed characters. We get a lot of great character moments between them. And overall, it does have me more excited for the direction the show is going forward, and I say it looks even more promising now than it did last week. So that's it for my review of Context is for Kings. I'll be back next week with another Star Trek Discovery review. I'll also do videos from all previous 5 Star Trek series as well as doing videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.